It's just not enough to plant fruit trees. If you want a good production of fruits from your fruit trees, you need to ensure good pollination. Now, a good pollination is determined by two factors or two elements. One are the pollinators, and the second are the pollinizers. Now, pollinators are, of course, our bees. They flit from flower to flower, pollinating our flowers, fertilizing our flowers. The pollinizers are trees themselves. Pollinizers are trees with a different genetic trait that also help in the fertilization in the pollination process of a flower. Now, there are some fruit trees which require only the pollinators. They only require the bees, for example, the peaches. But there are some fruit trees like the apples, pears, plums, and cherries, which require both the pollinators as well as the pollinizers. So today I'm going to be discussing in this video about plums and their pollinizers. Plums are one such fruit tree which require both. They require the pollinators, the bees, as well as they require the pollinizers. A plum tree with a different genetic trait which also helps in the fertilization of the flowers. Now, as far as my farm is concerned, I have over 15 different varieties of plums. And you might wonder, why do I need to worry about pollinizers? I have so much of diversity of different varieties of plums, and cross pollination would happen between these different varieties, and my flowers would pollinate, they would fertilize. Why do I need to worry about pollinizers? But unfortunately, sadly, it does not work like that for plums. The plums that I have on my farm, or the plums that you have in Himachal Pradesh, in my state in India, they're all the Japanese varieties of plums. And these Japanese varieties of plums, they all come from one breeding center in California called the Zyger Genetic Program. And in this breeding center, all these different varieties of plums were bred, and they all have the same genetic trait. Now, whether I have 15 plums or I have 50 plums, as far as pollination is concerned, I have a monoculture of different varieties of plums on the farm. They are not going to cross pollinate each other, or if the cross pollination is going to happen, it's going to be very weak or not at all. So I need a plum variety which is not coming from this genetic center in California. And because that plum is not going to be from zygote genetics, it's going to have a different genetic makeup. And because it's going to have a different genetic makeup, it's going to help, it's going to aid in the cross pollination of the plums. I have one such variety of plum, and that variety is called Shiro. And this here is that plum. This is the Shiro. This is our pollinizer. This is the plum variety that we're going to use to pollinate our other plum varieties that we have on the farm. Mind you, Shiro is also a Japanese plum, just like the other plum varieties that we have on the farm, except that this particular Japanese plum was not bred at Zyger genetics. And that makes all the difference because this has a different genetic strain. For the good pollination to happen, the flower needs pollen coming from a variety of plum which has a different genetic strain. Our Shiro has a different genetic strain, so that is why it is a great pollinizer for us. So I have just one Shiro tree. This is the tree I planted, I think in 2019 or 2020 it was, and it's become this huge tree. It bears golden yellow or pale yellow colored plums. In Japanese, Shiro means light colored. That's why we have light colored plums or pale yellow colored plums on the Shiro tree. So like I said, I have just one tree. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take scion or cuttings from this particular tree and take these scions and graft them onto the different varieties of trees, different varieties of plum trees that I have on the farm, which come from zygote genetics. Those are going to be pollinated by the scions that I'm going to be taking from the Shiro tree. These scions are going to grow on these different varieties that I have, and they are going to bear flowers of Shiro. They are going to be bearing me flowers which are going to help these trees to pollinate. But unfortunately, I have just one Shiro tree. This is the only tree I have. So what I'm going to do now here is to help pollinize my 15 different varieties of plums that I have on the farm, is I'm going to take science of the Shiro tree and graft them onto these different varieties so that Shiro, these scions can grow onto the body of the parent tree and they can help pollinize our plum trees. So for successful grafting, for a successful union, for a successful grafting to happen, you need to take out the right scion of the parent tree. Over here, I'm selecting for the scions and I'm selecting 1-year-old wood. And 1-year-old wood is very easy to tell apart from the older wood because the older wood is somewhat brownish black in color. Whereas the scions, if you see, they are somewhat mustard in color. They're new, they're fresh. And what you need to also ensure is that the budding has not happened. The buds have not swollen on the scions because if the buds have swollen already, your graft won't be as successful. So as you can see, the buds over here are still intact, they're still dormant. But on the plum tree on which you're going to be grafting these scion woods from the pollinizer, these trees should show some sign of life. Some sap movement should have started already. That is going to ensure a successful union between the scion wood and the parent tree. So I can see that this particular plum tree, I think it is black amber. It has already shown me some signs of life. Sap movement has already started. So I am going to graft the scion wood on one of its branches. The technique of grafting that we are following on these trees is called whip and tongue. This is the graft over here, and the graft, we are ensuring that the graft is towards the sunny side, it's facing the south so that it gets all the sun, because this is a pollinizer, this is the scion and this is the parent plant. We want the pollinizer, the flowers on the pollinizer, to attract all the bees so that they can work as donors. Those flowers can distribute their pollen around this plum tree and pollinize the other flowers. Now this is top grafting. This has been grafted onto a branch. We selected the branch over here. Like I said, we have selected this branch because it was facing the sun. It's facing the south, and this is right in the center. The bees are going to come here, and this is not going to become a very big branch, but we are okay with that. Maybe a few 20, 30, 50 flowers of Shiro are going to be enough to fertilize this one tree. The other thing you need to ensure is that you take out any branch or any stem which is growing out from below the graft union, because that is likely to suck out all the energy, all the carbohydrates that we want to get into the scion, because it's going to be very delicate. We want the scion wood to develop into a very healthy branch so that it can produce all the pollen that this particular tree requires for pollination. This particular plum tree is the red butte, and red butte has also not been producing a lot. This particular tree at least has not been producing a lot because of lack of pollination, I think, and Shiro is going to come and do the job of the pollinizer. This is the branch I think we can graft. Chandra ji, ye wala karna aap ye wala na? So this branch is the one that we're going to graft with the Shiro scion. So is Shiro the only plum pollinizer? No, there is another one. The other one is called Santa Rosa. And in Himachal Pradesh, in this part of the world where people grow plums commercially, Santa Rosa has been grown since decades and it's more popular. But in my estimation, in my research, Shiro trumps over Santa Rosa in three different distinct ways. Now, number one is that Shiro has a far distinct genetic trait compared to Santa Rosa, which makes it a better pollinator because the cross pollination is going to be better. The flower is going to receive, it's going to be more receptive towards pollen coming from a flower which is coming from a tree which has a very distinct genetic trait or a quality. Santa Rosa, meanwhile, has almost the similar genetic traits compared to the plums produced by Zyger genetics. Now, that is number one. And number two is that Shiro is unique in that it is self fertile. The flowers of the same tree can fertilize each other. In fact, each flower can fertilize itself. The pollen from one flower, from the anther to the stigma, they can fertilize each other. The flower itself can fertilize itself, and a flower from one branch of Shiro can fertilize the flower from the other branch in the same tree. So it makes it self fertile. So when a flower is self fertile, there is more pollen viability. Santa Rosa is generally not self fertile. It can produce fruits by itself, it can pollinate itself, but they are going to be off years and on years on Santa Rosa. And number three is that, and I think it's very important for commercial farmers, farmers who are producing early harvest varieties of plums, because they want the plums to go into the market before the onset of monsoon. Because what the monsoon does is, what the rains do is, they crack open the plums and the plums can be damaged or completely destroyed. So the early harvest varieties are the plums that you favor in commercial farming. Those are the plums that you want. You want to harvest them before the monsoon, before the rains. In this, Shiro comes in because Shiro is an early blooming variety of pollinizer compared to Santa Rosa. It blooms much before Santa Rosa and it helps pollinize all these early blooming, early harvest varieties of plums like Black Amber, Friar, Red Butte, Early Queen, Black Diamond, and some others. All of these are harvested before the monsoon. All of these, more or less, depending on your altitude, of course, are harvested before the monsoons, before the rains. And Shiro helps in the fertilization of these because its bloom times corresponds with all these varieties I've named. As a contrast, Santa Rosa blooms a little later than Shiro. So this is going to be helpful. Santa Rosa is going to be helpful for late bloomers like this particular variety that I have here called the Pink Jewel. And there's another one called Angelino. All these are late harvest varieties and the flowers will bloom a little later. And the bloom time of these varieties that I have are going to correspond with the bloom time of Santa Rosa. So it's good to have if you have varieties like I have. I have, early season varieties of plums. I have mid season varieties of plums. I have late season varieties of plums like the Pink Jewel. So for this, I need two pollinizers. For the early season or the mid season varieties, I need Shiro. For the late season varieties like the Pink Jewel, I need Santa Rosa. So the bloom time of the pollinizer should correspond with a particular variety. If that does not happen, no matter how good a pollinizer you have, it is not going to fertilize the flowers. So you might ask, why at all do I have these late harvest varieties of plums? Because the monsoon is going to come and potentially they can damage these fruits, and they do. The reason that I have this kind of a requirement is because I have a Cafe Koblu in Shimla, where we need fresh fruit coming from the farm, and we make mojitos out of these plums, and we make jams out of these plums, and we also have these picking tours which are booked by people who come and stay at our farm stay over here. So if they come in August and September and they book a fruit picking tour over here on the farm, they can pick our Pink Jewel and other late harvest varieties of plums we have on the farm. Now the question is, what if you don't have any pollinizers? Will your plum tree not bear any fruit at all? Well, that's not true. This plum tree that I'm pruning is the black gold variety, and there are no pollinizers over here, but it still bears us fruit year after year. This is because some of the varieties that have been bred in zygote genetics in California, they do fertilize some of the pollen, but it's going to be very inconsistent, and the pollen, the fruit, the resultant fruit is not going to be that good quality. This particular plum tree has been bearing us without a pollinizer, but to get a consistent harvest year after year, I need to introduce a pollinizer on this tree. So this need to have a different genetic strain, does it apply only to the plants? Does it apply only to the fruit trees? No, it also applies to the animal kingdom. Many years ago, I was traveling in Africa. I had gone on a safari, and there is a beautiful safari that you can do in Ngorongoro Crater in Tanzania. In this Ngorongoro Crater, which is called the open air zoo, where all these animals are living inside this crater, and they are all hemmed in by these crater walls, which are almost 600 to 700 meters tall. Now, what is happening is all these lions, and I noticed this firsthand. I saw the lions over there. Those lions, they looked very sickly, they looked diseased. And the reason for this was that these lions, they were confined, they were isolated in this crater. They could not go outside the crater because of these high walls. On the rim of the craters were built these resorts and hotels, because of which they were confined to this crater. They could not come out, and new blood, new lions could not migrate into the crater wall and breed with the females. Now, because of that, interbreeding happened, and because of the interbreeding, generation after generation, the lions were very sickly, they were diseased compared to the lions that I saw in Serengeti. Now, that's because no new genetic strain, no new bloodline was coming in and getting introduced to these lions of Ngorongoro. All of these lions, they were confined in this open air zoo. Now it is possible for your plums, cherries, apples and pears to produce you a lot of flowers but no fruit at all. Now this happens because of the absence of two important components, and these are the pollinizers and the pollinators. So you can take care of the pollinizers by introducing them as a graft onto the parent plant, like we have done on this plum tree over here. But what do you do about the pollinators? You still need to depend on nature. You still need to depend on the bees. In fact, this pollinizer over here, these flowers on the pollinizer are going to be dependent on the bees. They're going to be dependent on the pollinator to transfer their pollen from them to the flowers of this parent tree in order to fertilize them. And to keep a thriving population, a very healthy population of bees alive, we have to, and there's no way around it, we have to maintain, we have to keep their habitats alive, we have to maintain, we have to preserve the sources of food. This particular bush over me is a native bush called Principia utilis, and locally I think we call it bakel. And you can see it is full of these beautiful flowers. These are the sources of food. The nectar and the pollen from these flowers is the source of food for our native bee, the Epicerana bee, especially in winters when there are no sources of food, there are no flowers flowering anywhere. And this is how our bees can remain healthy if we keep these bushes and these shrubs and we do not destroy them. So it's very important for us to maintain their sources of food. So we cannot destroy these shrubs, because if we destroy these shrubs, we also destroy the habitat, the sources of food of our bees. And this is the reason why the bee population across the world is going down. And of course, these bushes are the habitat for all our native birds. And right now behind me, you can hear a cacophony of these birds singing. These are all different species of birds, and they live on the periphery of our orchards. And these birds are right now, you can hear behind me, all kinds of birds. There's the Himalayan bulbul, there's the street laughing thrush. There are all kinds of different birds which are settled over here, which are living over here in these bushes and enjoying the sunset.